topic of our Dhamma talk this evening is going to be neutrality and composure in the context of the knowledge of equanimity about certain formations, with a short excursion into patience. And this talk is meant for specifically for some of our meditators here, and for the others, it will contain many important points that might help for a general understanding, and how equanimity might help in the course of the meditation practice. Now, when practicing insight meditation for quite some time, then one is likely to traverse a number of different insight knowledges, and sooner or later one will, having passed this aspect of knowledge or contemplation of destruction, as we discussed yesterday, so having passed that, sooner or later one is certainly going to end up in the knowledge of equanimity about certain formations. And that particular insight knowledge is defined, at least defined in two places, possibly even more places. And number one, in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, its fourth chapter, paragraph 161, and it's also defined in the Patisambhidamagga, the path of discrimination. Now, in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, the definition for this particular insight knowledge is as follows, namely, equanimity about formations is a name for equanimity consisting in neutrality. And certainly that's why the emphasis will be on neutrality. Neutrality about certain understanding reobservation, and composure regarding the hindrances, etc. And then in the path of discrimination, its first treatise, section or paragraph 306 to 330, we find a slightly different definition, namely as follows: insight knowledge of desire for deliverance, knowledge of reflection or reobservation, and of composure is knowledge of equanimity about formations. So what we have here, three items make up that certain knowledge of equanimity about formations. For one thing, desire for deliverance, then the reobservation and composure. Now, in both of these two definitions, the term composure comes up. And in the Visuddhimagga definition, neutrality is also mentioned. Now, since those two terms are part of our definitions here of the knowledge of equanimity about certain formations, one might as well take a closer look at them. And the Pali term, maybe before we do this, the Pali term sankopika jnana can be broken up into several parts. Jnana is your insight knowledge. Sankhara are your conditioned formations, or formations that are conditioned by impermanence, by unsatisfactoriness, and by an absence of the self. And so it's the knowledge of equanimity about certain conditioned formations. Now, the classical fourfold definition of neutrality of mind in the Pali scriptural language known as Tadra Majjhatthata, literally meaning there in the middleness. So that definition is as follows, namely, its characteristic is that of conveying consciousness and mental factors evenly. Samavahita Lakkhana in the Pali scriptural language. And there are two functions to this certain particular mental state. The first one being to prevent certain deficiency and excess, and certainly the second one, and which is related, to prevent partiality. And so neutrality then is manifested as neutrality. The Venerable Sadhu Pandita says it's a state of ease and balance. It keeps the proper middle. Now, this particular mental state is certainly being compared to a charioteer who's driving a chariot and who looks on with equanimity on two thoroughbreds, so two horses which are progressing evenly along the roadway. And since they are of equal strength and they're progressing evenly, the charioteer has an easy job because they're not pulling in at different speeds and strength. Now, this neutrality of mind should not be confused with indifference, which is certainly the near enemy. It's near enemy, and certainly that indifference is due to ignorance. Now, when it comes to neutrality of mind, then it's with regard to a human being, this means that suddenly you do not throw a person out of your heart, but rather, if let's say conditions are unfavorable, then you just wait for a little while, and suddenly then sooner or later the person will understand better, the situation might change, and suddenly the person, and you'll give full attention to the person again. Whereas indifference would be saying, okay, sorry, I've suffered, and I'm not going to deal with this person anymore. So that would be throwing the person out of your heart. And this certain mental state of neutrality, as we've seen, is characterized by conveying consciousness and the mental factors evenly. So the mind, prior to this, is certainly oftentimes pretty unbalanced. So sometimes faith is predominant, as we've seen. Sometimes wisdom is predominant, or the intellect, the cunningness is predominant. At certain other times, effort might be predominant. At other times, again, concentration might be predominant. And so many imbalances might occur. However, when with some practice, all of this changes, and when equanimity is quite certainly predominant, then the corresponding mental factors will be well distributed. And that then also manifests physically as a balanced and certainly very centered posture, both in the sitting as well as in the walking meditation. Now, since the term composure is part of the Visuddhimagga definition for the knowledge of equanimity, why we might as well take a closer look at it. And certainly it is a term that oftentimes doesn't get explained, and certainly that is at first sight maybe somewhat difficult to relate to. Now, sometimes looking at its opposite might certainly help for a better understanding. So the opposite would be a lack of composure. And certainly, so what do you think? What would be symptoms of a lack of composure? A meditator who is lacking composure would display which symptoms?
Disturbed.
Will be disturbed, and what else? Restless, yes, you could say this. Anything else?
Impatient.
There will be impatient, yes. You could say this, yes. Agitated, yes, okay. And so there's still a number of other aspects, such as straining. So, trying to force the practice, clenching one's teeth and forcing the practice and getting all tensed up, and certainly then practicing maybe with excessive effort. And this straining may happen outside of retreat, but may also happen during an intensive meditation retreat. Now, some possible causes for straining might be that certain one is setting standards for oneself. I should by now, the retreat is coming to a close, only 1 week remains, and by now I should have gained such and such a level in my practice. And so setting standards might certainly contribute to the straining. Ambition might also contribute to it. Certain expectations, a lot of self or ego that might be involved, and then excessive effort. So lack of composure is certainly for sure not certainly useful. Now, the Pali term for composure is what? Does any one of you know? No? So, santitana. And it is a word that does not get frequently used in the text. And when checking the Pali text, the Pali text societies, the Pali English dictionary, then there are very few entries there. Now, a related term is certainly the verb santitati, which consists of two parts, san and titati, and titati means basically to stand. And so there's several meanings certainly here for the term santitati. The first one being to stand or stand still, or to remain, to continue. A second interpretation of the verb would be to be established, to be put into order, but this doesn't really concern us. And then the third meaning is of more relevance, namely to stick to be fixed or settled, to be composed. And then number 4 is to restrain oneself, and number 5 is to wait for or to wait on someone. Now, the noun santitana then has been translated as composure. The Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita of Burma also recommends retention of composure, and certainly he furthermore proposes the term firmness. Now, this certain composure then in the path of discrimination, the Patisambhidamagga, in paragraph 306 and the following paragraphs, then is being mentioned in the context of composure towards the 15 essentials of life, or 15 essentials of being. being. Now, some of the really essential events in a human existence are what? Well, without taking birth, you wouldn't be here. So birth must be essential. And then, you correctly followed, death. And then also and then along the same line, or maybe two, so birth, death, and then other major events certainly in the life of a human being are sickness, yes, indeed. And certainly then, do we all grow younger and younger by the day? So old age, and then there are events when, let's say, a relative or so passes away, or we lose some precious item. Then sorrow may be there, lamentation may be there, despair may be there. And then there are things such related to ordinary physical and mental formations, things such as the arising of an object, the occurrence of an object, and then also the dissolution of an object. And there are other aspects, but we're not going to go into those. So we can ask ourselves, do we, in the past, have we always remained, or have we always retained composure with regard to these major events in our human existence? And so I suppose in some cases maybe yes, in some cases not. Now, the Venerable Jnanarama, a Sri Lankan meditation master and scholar who passed away maybe about 5-7 years ago, and who also promoted the Mahasi school of Vipassana meditation in Sri Lanka, he defines composure as follows. He says composure is or implies the continuity of knowledge, or the occurrence of a series of knowledges as an unbroken process. And maybe to add that the mind then, or the meditator, remains totally composed about what is going on. So even though one might be experiencing several, or going through several insight knowledges in a relatively quick succession, yet the mind is not necessarily touched. And to give you an illustration related to your own meditation practice. So this would be as if you were to traverse the insight knowledges that you've experienced so far in this retreat in fast forward, let's say in 5 minutes. And so at first certainly it's maybe quite pleasant, some calmness is there, and then the hindrances all of a sudden attack you or assault you, and then a number of wholesome mental states are there. You're pleased again, and then again some difficult mental states come, and then everything keeps changing, and then again the hindrances are back, etc., etc. And so it would be as if one gets, or as if riding on a roller coaster, up and down, back and forth, and nonetheless retaining composure. Now, in the text, this composure is certainly being mentioned in particular with regards to the hindrances. But before going into this, let me help the understanding with a made-up illustration. And Chris, our retreat manager here, has, if I'm not mistaken, managed retreats already for several years. How many years? 5, 6, 7? 7 years already. And so Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. When you started being a retreat manager and you had to deal with all these many difficulties that come up during a retreat, like plumbing problems, and then dissatisfied meditators, and then meditators who fall sick, and meditators who need this, who need that, and then there may be problems around the food. Someone's food without what is this? What was that one thing? I forgot. So, especially food without one item. It's very gluten. There we go. Gluten-free food we don't have in Nepal. This distinction is not being made there at all. And so, anyways, around here, some yogis insist on gluten-free food, which makes life much more difficult for the cook, and then others, however, are okay with gluten, and so there's so many issues, and then having to deal with let's say the proprietor of the retreat center. So it's definitely not an easy task. Now let us ask Chris for her experience. When you were the retreat manager the first time, did you do it with composure or not? You don't think so? But now, 7 years down the road, and with 7 retreats, this being the 7th retreat, have you gained some composure? And based on years and years. So, with years and years of managing retreats, and not just one retreat per year, it's correct, no, several retreats a year. So, Chris's experience as a retreat manager are quite substantial, and I think she knows, she already knows at the beginning of a retreat what to expect, and so it's right away from the beginning she's much more nonchalant about the whole thing, much more easygoing, and she knows already how to deal with the different difficulties, and so no big deal. So we can say Chris by now is managing retreats with a great degree of composure. And so that then makes it easier for her as well as everyone else. Now, in the course of the meditation practice, as a meditator, we are like a person on a roller coaster. So we'll be, on occasion, our practice will take us to tremendous heights, and then we will feel exhilarated. We think we will have experiences and think this is really la crème de la crème, so it couldn't get any better. And at other times we sit there and then we're close to tears and even shedding tears. And so, or sometimes also there are all these terrible physical pains and aches that occur and cramps and whatnot. And so, the practice at times can be quite challenging. So, with little retreat experience as a meditator, will we have much composure? At first, not. But with more retreat experience, let's say we've done several retreats, several longer retreats, and we've gone through the same stages, the same difficulties, also same heights or similar heights, we are already much more familiar with the whole thing. We know what to expect, and with this, then we manage to maintain or retain an attitude of composure. And so in particular towards the hindrances, but also other difficulties. Now, one of our meditators from Lumbini has described this or one particular aspect of the knowledge of equanimity about certain formations as emotional stability, and that might actually very nicely fit in this certain context. Another meditator has said she felt very strong and stable. And when we take a look at certain, for instance, this Buddha statue, and we look at the face, then we might interpret the facial expression as partly reflecting a sense of composure. Oftentimes, people interpret the Buddha's facial expression to display certain inner peace. That yes, but composure is also part of it. Composure towards the ups and downs, the ups and downs of life. Now, the Venerable Sadhu Pandita has certainly explained what is meant by composure, by saying that in the context of the Vipassana practice, one will observe the various formations, such as the hindrances, and then realize, okay, each and every one of them is an unwholesome mental state. I don't want to keep this unnecessarily, and then based on the reflection, and then or having reflected like this, the person will then try to let go of the one particular hindrance or the whole set of hindrances, and then maintain or retain composure with regard to those certain hindrances. And see, when dealing with the hindrances during the higher stages of the Vipassana practice, at first one will deal with them, let's say, with gritted teeth, and will strain a lot and try to overcome them. But when encountering the hindrances several times in the course of one's practice, then gradually one gets more and more familiar with them. One will know what works and what doesn't work, and with this then composure is there. So that's how composure sanpitana comes into our practice. The same thing the Venerable Sayadaw explains holds true for the jhana practice and the different jhana factors. So there to a certain degree of reflection, and certain composure is or is at work. And now we will not have the time to go into all the many details that are connected with the knowledge of equanimity, and many of those details are highly fascinating, but this you will have to discover those for yourselves. Now, one major aspect of equanimity about formations is, or a factor that contributes to towards equanimity about formations is, and as Marcia has mentioned already in an earlier talk, is the aspect of no self, anatta, and in other words, voidness. Voidness in a fourfold manner, namely realizing there is no myself, there is nothing belonging to myself, there is no another self, and there's nothing belonging to another self. And so this aspect then of voidness does become quite predominant for meditators, and it prepares the ground for other things. Now, some of the major stations during this particular phase in one's practice are as follows. Namely, a meditator will see formations again and again, or discern formations again and again in the light of impermanence, anicca, in the light of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and in the light of absence of a self, anatta. And since this still, this understanding still has to deepen and mature further. Now, having done this, and also having abandoned terror and delight, or to put it differently, fear and delight, or to put it again differently, having transcended pairs of opposites such as happiness and unhappiness, or opposites such as maybe misery and delight, and or let's say delight and then non-delight or disenchantment, or in a general sense unwholesome mental states versus wholesome mental states, etc., etc. There are plenty of such pairs of opposites. And then, furthermore, having become equanimous or neutral in the investigation of formations. Now, what does this mean? By the time you reach this particular phase in the meditation practice, you will have observed the whole range of physical and mental formations, starting with the rising and falling open of the abdomen. Probably not just 1,000 times, but many thousands of times, maybe 100,000 of times. And so just like Chris, as a retreat manager, having faced similar problems many times, has become or has developed a certain composure. So too, meditators develop more and more composure, as well as neutrality. Namely, they've seen it all. And suddenly with this, the investigation becomes pretty balanced, pretty neutral. So even though some fascinating object may arise, the mind does not get excited anymore. Even though, let's say, some object that earlier on would cause a collapse in your practice arises, nonetheless the mind remains pretty neutral. So having then gone beyond, or having discerned formations in the light of the three characteristics, having abandoned pairs of opposites and become neutral or equanimous, then sooner or later one might then find the gateway to liberation. Now, the 6 qualities are being attributed to the knowledge of equanimity about formations, as mentioned by the Venerable Hassisada of Burma. And those qualities are very useful. The very first one being an absence of fear and sudden delight. The second one being pain and pleasure are seen with equanimity. The third one is the meditation usually carries on automatically and without any effort. Maybe just to elaborate on this point a little bit, good. So if early on in one's practice one had to put in a great amount of effort, then when reaching this particular phase, the energy comes naturally. Energy is just naturally being set free, and that then means that one can easily make the necessary effort. And the state of equanimity is said to last for a long time, or longer and longer periods of time. So if normally a meditator would just sit for an hour, or maybe an hour and a half or so, then sooner or later one finds that one can practice for much longer.
When you mentioned the unseen three characteristics, is that a conscious knowing?
No. This happens naturally. No, it's just that's an object that is under observation will appear in the light of impermanence, or in the light of unsatisfactoriness or absence of a self.
But it's not an actual thinking about it.
No. And one could incline the mind a little bit towards this. Now, furthermore, as when certain meditation is lasting longer, there's another interesting development taking place, namely that one's meditation is becoming more and more refined. Everything is becoming more and more refined. The objects of observation become more refined, as well as the observing and knowing mind, to a degree that is unthought of by the beginning meditator. So when you start out with your meditation practice, you have no clue whatsoever how refined things might get later on in your practice. And when beginning meditators don't realize how coarse the objects are that they have to deal with, and they also don't realize how coarse the mind is that they are using. Now, the sixth quality is that of one's meditation being fixed and steady, and the mind recoils, and the mind does not wander to any other objects. And the mind recoiling means that it gets less and less interested in external formations, and the last part, the mind does not wander to any other objects. Well, that is somewhat similar, even if one were to send the mind out, even if one were to tempt the mind with, let's say, some sense desire inducing object, yet the mind will just briefly go there and immediately return. It just doesn't take the interest in it anymore. And now, a few more points that certainly might be worth explaining are that before reaching this, or in approaching this knowledge of equanimity, a meditator is likely to experience what might be called the yo-yo effect. So one's practice will be fluctuating, might be going up and then down again, and up again and down again, etc. And that might at first be somewhat disconcerting to a meditator who is not understanding what is happening. However, that yo-yo effect over time will gradually get less and less pronounced. Now, certain mental qualities or mental factors will become quite predominant, and those basically have already been mentioned in previous Dhamma talks, such as the enlightenment factors consisting of the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, of investigation of states, and then of effort, of joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Maybe just one more item. When the practice becomes pretty refined, then quite naturally physical formations will become less and less obvious, less and less discernible, and to the same extent, mental objects become more pronounced. So it's the mental formations that move to the foreground of a meditator's observation. And when this happens, then we can say that Citta Nupassana, namely mindful contemplation of the mind, is the predominant form of meditation. Now, all sorts of difficulties that might occur in a meditator who is trying to establish this equanimity about certain formations, and so I'll try to address just a few of those. There are many points that could be mentioned. Now, one major point comes in the form of expectations, anticipation, hopes, desires, and goals for one's setting goals for one's practice. Some people are very goal-oriented, and then in let's say the world of business, we have a very precise, clear-cut timetable. So by 3 months, let's say phase A of a project needs to be accomplished, and by the 6th month, the project needs to be entirely completed. This kind of time planning will work for your meditation practice or not? Glenn? You're shaking your head. This will not work at all. And if you were to do this kind of thing, then it would actually make your practice more difficult. So in this context, there's also time pressure. So if let's say as the end of the retreat is coming up, then one might start counting the days, and with every day less, the pressure on the meditators increases exponentially. And accordingly, the meditators get more and more tensed up and lose their composure more and more. So superficial mindfulness will not work. What we do need is continuous mindfulness and penetrative mindfulness, and really from moment to moment. And I mean not just one observation, one finding within 1 minute, but rather many moments of observation and knowledge within 1 minute, and even within one single rising movement, one single falling movement of the abdomen. So things the quality of our mindfulness has to improve more and more. And now, as we have discussed already in the past, an imbalance of the controlling faculties might make it difficult for a meditator to move ahead. The same thing might also happen when there's an imbalance with regard to the 2 pairs or 2 groups of enlightenment factors. So the more active enlightenment factors, or activating enlightenment factors, such as investigation of states and then effort and joy on the one hand side, and then on the other hand the calming factors such as tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Now, sometimes what happens is a meditator's equanimity, overall equanimity, is still relatively weak, and so the person easily reacts, let's say, to external or internal disturbances, and with this thing, the practice temporarily collapses. So, one might get upset that maybe the toilet in one's bathroom is not working, or one might get upset with the food, or whatever it might, or maybe the squeaking floorboards, different things for different people. And then another common difficulty is that since a number of wholesome mental states arise, one might get attached to those wholesome and pleasant mental states, and that will cause a stagnation in one's practice. Also, if there's a strong sense of self, then this will interfere with one's meditation. Keeping one's posture still, or keeping one's body still, will help. Longer sittings might also help, but they do need to be balanced with some amount of walking meditation. Also, by this time in one's practice, one doesn't want to get caught up anymore in an object. So let's say if some unpleasant memory from the past comes up, and maybe some family issue or whatever it might be, then, and the mind in the past has been quite obsessive about it, then at this point one will want to let go of it as quickly as possible. So if the mind is hitching, is getting stuck in some object, then this might interfere with one's practice. Now, overall, it might be fair to say that the continuity of mindfulness and also strengthening of equanimity are the main points that will then contribute to a further deepening of one's practice. So, with a fair amount of neutrality of mind, as well as certain composure, retention of composure, in accordance with the Visuddhimagga definition, a meditator is likely to move ahead. Now, somewhat related and somewhat helpful for meditators' practice is the quality of patience. And since in the meditation practice all sorts of difficulties suddenly come up, patience might then be helpful. Now, for a better understanding, the Dhamma Sangani has defined Khanti, patience, as forbearance, as endurance, as not being truculent, and being coherent in speech, and being good-tempered. Another way of expressing this would be an absence of intolerance, ability to forgive, and endure, absence of ferocity, and absence of bluntness. The Jataka, volume 3, section 40, speaks of a psychological ability in a person not to become angered when one is reviled, beaten, and slandered by others. Now, the definition of patience as given in the commentary to the Charya Pitaka is worth noting. Namely, there it says that patience has the characteristic of acceptance, and its function is to endure the desirable as well as the undesirable, and its manifestation is as tolerance or non-opposition, and seeing things as they really are, and is its proximate cause. So, accepting a situation for what it is, rather than fighting a particular situation. And obviously, in our meditation practice, pleasant experiences come up, unpleasant experiences, desirable, undesirable objects come up, and in all cases, we then try to accept and be patient. Now, the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw of Burma is saying that, or is writing in the book Brahma on the Brahma Viharas, that patience is basically that mental factor that is contrary to the mental factor of anger. And so in other words, patience comes under the heading of adosa, the absence of hatred or ill will, and loving kindness also, and gentleness and friendliness come, amity, all of those come under adosa, non-hatred. And interestingly enough, the characteristic of, or one of the characteristics of non-hatred is non-opposing, and the other one being lack of ferocity. Its function is to remove annoyance or to remove fever, and its manifestation is as agreeableness. And then non-hatred comprises the positive qualities such as loving kindness, gentleness, etc. And the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw is saying that patience describes this ability to endure any kind of provocation and to remain calm without anger and doing anything unwholesome, whereas loving kindness is somewhat more comprehensive, and one is wishing for the welfare and happiness of others. Now, we have to make or it might be helpful for a better understanding of patience kanti to know that patience gets used in different contexts. So, for instance, when patience is spoken of as a parami, as one of the perfections, then it means practicing forbearance towards the manifold failings of human beings, so one's fellow human beings. And the Charya Pitaka, or the commentator Dhammapada, then speaks to quite some extent on different ways with regard to patience, or different reflections in the connection with patience, and it's always with regard to other human beings. So, obviously, we do not live in a world where everyone is perfect, and so even though we may be thinking that I myself, I'm perfect, yet everyone else is imperfect, but this is not realistic. And so just like others are imperfect, we are also imperfect in our conduct and mental states. And maybe the only the perfect being or one of the of very few perfect beings is the Buddha.
Find out, is there that notion in Buddhism that we find in other traditions of trying to put yourself in the place of the other person in order to understand why they are behaving the way?
Yeah, very much so. And so, there's also, there's in the context of virtue, there's this standard of putting oneself in the shoes of another person before actually harming another person. So, and then reflecting, would I want to be let's say beaten? If then the answer to this is no, I don't want to be beaten, this is painful, and so too, just like I don't want to be beaten, so others will, or another person will also not like it. And there is even a Dhammapada verse in which this taking oneself as a standard or as a yardstick is being mentioned. And now, one of the occurrences of patience in the text is in connection with regard to others' speech. Now, is there anyone among you who has gone through life without having ever being criticized? Is there or is there not? Absolute silence. So I suppose there's none. And is there anyone among you who has always been talked to only in friendly terms? Again, a no. And so in the course of human existence, we're likely to suffer various kinds of speech. And the Buddha has expressed this really nicely. He says, and I'm quoting from the 21st Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, paragraph 11. There it says, Bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and lay meditators, there are these 5 courses of speech that others may use when they address you. Their speech may be timely or untimely. So if it's timely, it's great. But it has surely happened to you that when you're under total stress, someone comes and comes with another, special and certain absolute or request that needs certain instant fulfillment. And then their speech may be true or untrue, gentle or harsh, connected with good or with harm, spoken with a mind of loving kindness or spoken with inner hate. And then the Bhikkhu and the Buddha goes on, herein you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of loving kindness without inner hate. We shall abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and starting with him or her, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, gracious, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and lay meditators. Now, please notice in this, our minds will remain unaffected. The term unaffected is a reference to what? Yeah, there you go, equanimity, that's it. And then not retaliating, not retaliating with abusive speech if one got verbally abused. This is your aspect of patience, plus the loving kindness, adding or giving loving kindness as an additional goodie. Now, patience is required everywhere. It is required in samatha meditation. It is required in vipassana meditation, in life in general. And with regard to meditation practice, the Burmese have a saying which goes as follows: "Thikam ma nibbana yaute," which means only if one, or it means patience leads to nibbana. Literally translated, only if one is patient will one reach nibbana. Now, the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, in its instructions on loving kindness meditation, during the preliminary explanations or instructions, mentions or suggests that one first of all should see the danger in hate, and then also see the advantage in patience, such as that if one were to act out of hatred, then in the worst case one might kill another human being. On the other hand, advantages of patience are that this is certainly the best moral practice, and then that this can be a strength, it can be a tremendous strength to the person who possesses patience. Now, when we think of life in general, then we are likely to come across all sorts of difficult social situations, and sometimes a situation may seem like almost unsolvable, and or cannot be resolved in any way, and yet if we assume or adopt a different attitude, then the whole thing may change immediately. So if you look at some problem that or some social friction that has arisen in a community, and you look at it as if 250 years would have already passed by between the event and you're looking at it, then that event may seem pretty insignificant. So if you look back from 250 years from now onwards, then you will probably just smile about this so-called problem. Now, from an if we come from a Dhamma perspective, ultimately speaking, there is no reason whatsoever to get angry with another person or with a particular situation. And the Venerable Sayadaw Pandita, with regard to patience, has offered the following, saying, he goes, let it be such that one shall have patience with others, not others shall have patience with oneself. Now, Acharya Dhammapada, one of the commentators who has written on the perfections, the paramis, has many different reflections on patience, and just one to share with you, namely, when another person is let's say, giving you a hard time, verbally, physically, in whatever way it might be, even in a non-verbal way, then you could consider that person as a benefactor. So why is your aggressor your benefactor? There you go. Because he or she gives you an opportunity to practice patience. And in the end, you could even be grateful to that person. Now, let me conclude today's Dhamma talk by wishing may these qualities of neutrality, especially composure, and also patience with regard to other human beings, but as well as difficult experiences in the meditation practice itself, may these qualities contribute to, or may you apply these qualities to your meditation practice, to the ups and downs in the practice, and may they help you to see through whatever comes up, and ultimately may they help you to gain balance of mind, a strong mind, emotionally strong mind, and then may this be the ground for the entering through the gateway to gateway of liberation, resulting in the experience or realization of the peace of Nibbana. May this happen during this very retreat here in Taos. And this is it for now.